Hello, everybody. It's episode 13 of Grizzlies Worldwide, and today we have with us. We're going to New Zealand, and we have with us someone that's been with the Grizzlies. No, it's not with the Grizzlies. He's always been with Steven Adams. He was like one of the more fun to follow Grizz accounts on Grizz Twitter. I'm talking, of course, about Steven Adams stats. Steven Adams stats. How are you tonight?
Yeah, good. Good. Thanks for having me on.
No, it's my pleasure. It's a pleasure. Like I think that for all the Greece fans to catch up on you and to catch up the things that you're doing now, you really miss on this fan base for sure. Uh, I might want to tell you because I just found out like 15 minutes ago. I was doing some uh, background check for this podcast, and I saw your username like a million times, Funaki Stats, and never checked what it was. Only now, today, I found out Stephen Funaki Adams, right?
Yeah, there you go. So it's his
Yeah.
middle name, and
Hmm.
if his tattoo on his arm, you'll see on his forearm that Funaki is tattooed there. It's the only sort of visible word in his tattoo. So yeah, his middle name.
Yeah, it's funny. It's just I saw it so many times, and only like 15 minutes ago, I realized what it was.
There you go.
Yeah. So first of all, I want to ask you, how did you come up with the idea for this Twitter profile?
Well, it was really. I mean, I'm a long time basketball fan. Played a lot myself, and
Hmm.
when there's only one guy in the NBA, New Zealand, a lot of New Zealanders just tune in to try and follow what's going on, but you can't always watch every game, and so you end up going on Twitter, going on, wherever to just try and get a sense of how he's going, um, and and it wasn't unusual. I wasn't unusual to be a New Zealander that found it difficult to follow, his career, no matter where he
Hmm.
was, from New Zealand, because New Zealand doesn't do a lot of great reporting on the NBA. It never really appears in mainstream media. You have to really go find it. Um, so I just got a bit sick of that, to be honest. So when he'd made the move, I'd followed him for years, but when he made the move to the Grizzlies, I kind of watched that transition and
Hmm.
saw how it play out, and thought, actually, if I'm someone that's wanting to find out more about what he's up to, how he's playing, his stats, his highlights, all of that stuff, then there's got to be a whole bunch of other people out there interested. And so when I first started the account, I thought, oh, yep, there'll be a few New Zealanders that jump on board. But then actually, I kind of underestimated how much of a legend Stephen Adams was in OKC, and a lot of that fan base started connecting with the account because they liked the idea of keeping in touch with one of their legendary players, and then actually got embraced by the Grizzlies Twitter
Hmm.
world as well, which then meant that it just sort of became a bit bigger than I was initially expecting.
And why did you choose to go a lot through analytics? Is there a a special reason for that?
Well, yeah, not even so much analytics. Like I've always been, interested in the stats side of things. I'm not
Hmm.
a data scientist or anything like that. But I didn't want it to just be another, Homer Stat Muse account. I wanted it to genuinely be something that was adding value to the impact that he has as a player. So I just had to kind of learn myself, really. I saw a lot of accounts out there that were actually really good at doing the stats analytics and conveying that in a way that was interesting and meaningful, and connecting it with the eye test in the videos. And so I just really learnt how to do that. I think initially when I started out, I had no idea what I was doing, and it was sort of tweeting once every few days or whatever. But you soon, learn the landscape of where you can find out information, the different sites that you can access stats. You start to build your own way of doing things, your own archive of information. So it really just evolved, and that was actually one of the things that I've learned to love about doing what I do,
Hmm.
is that there's always, even for a role player like Stephen Adams, there's an
Yeah.
endless amount of data that you can dig into and find out more and understand how he impacts the game of basketball.
Where do you get all this data from?
Mostly it's just the free site. So I use NBA stats, but not just the ones that are at the top level. There's a whole bunch of micro stats that sit underneath that, the advanced analytics stats. They include and incorporate the tracking stats. So once you go digging down that rabbit hole of the free and available stats on NBA.com, there's a hang of a lot there. PBP stats, PBP.com, they have another layer of sort of on-off stats. So I use a lot of those on-off stats to try and just
Hmm.
understand what's going on and convey what's going on when Steven Adams is on the court versus off the court. So yeah, they're my two go-tos, but then there are a whole bunch of other smaller sites as well. Some of them are paid for, some of them aren't. Basketball Reference obviously has a lot. There's also sites like, what are they now? Yeah, there's a whole bunch of them. Cleaning Glass. Yeah.
Yeah. For like studying a player, stats or film.
Always both for me. I
Hmm.
mean, I've watched enough of Steven Adams games and how he plays to be able to kind of do the stats things independent. But anytime I'm trying to bring meaning to those stats, you've always got to add the clips into it, and the other way around as well. If you're seeing something on the court and you're wondering what that means statistically or what the impact is, you can always match it up with stats after the game or during the game. So yeah, I've always tried to blend the two together. I think that's what makes it more engaging.
Yeah. Now, about Steven Adams, about his career, you're following him since when? Hello?
Oh, sorry, I lost you there. Cut out.
Sorry. About Steven Adams, about his professional career. Since when were you following Steven Adams?
Yeah, well,
Before he
mostly.
joined DA or after he
Yeah, I
joined?
mean, yeah, New Zealand's quite a small pond in terms of top level international talent. So even when Stephen Adams was coming through as a 17-year-old, he played 1 year in the National League here in New Zealand. I used to play in the National League here myself, so I was kind of always aware of that that league and the talent coming through. So he played that 1 year. He was obviously as big as he is now then, so a 6'10" guy coming through at that age, and he was athletic. He had a developing skill set with a bit of a handle, the ability to not just play back to the basket, but also had a bit of a mid-range stroke. And so all of the talk was that he was a great prospect. He only played sort of 13, 14 minutes a game for that one season, part of the championship team there, Wellington Saints.
Hmm.
But from there, he got connected into the US system. He was sort of mentored by a guy called Kenny McFadden in Wellington out of New Zealand. And from there, that was his pathway to then go into Pitt for a year, and then he really didn't know what his options were from there. He talks himself about how he just kind of threw himself in the draft after a year because he wasn't really loving the college experience, wasn't sure how it would
Hmm.
go.
Hmm.
Average 6 and 6 is his way of describing how good he was at Pitt. And
What do you mean?
then
What do you mean by that?
6 points and 6 rebounds
Ah,
when he
okay,
was at
okay.
Pitt. So it's not like he dominated college ball and was one and done. He was very much a big athletic guy with potential that was quite late to basketball. So he wasn't a standout lottery pick. The world was very different back in 2013, 2014. Anyone with that kind of size and athleticism was looked at regardless of their skills right then and there. So he wasn't expecting to be a lottery pick, but yeah, to go 12 overall, but then not to get picked up by a team that was tanking and was rebuilding. To get picked up by the Thunder when they had KD and Russ and were contending every year. That was really the start to it all. So yeah, I've followed him right the way through that Thunder period. Not on Twitter. I wasn't part of the fan base, if you like. I just watched from afar here, watched the coverage, watched as many games as I could,
Mm-hmm.
watched all of the playoff runs. And then it wasn't until actually I missed that whole Pelicans Twitter experience, which I understand wasn't fantastic. And then, it wasn't until 3 years ago when he first moved over. It was actually February after he came to the Grizzlies that I started the whole Twitter thing.
How okay? And how would you describe your time in Greece Twitter?
Oh, look, I mean, I haven't left Chris Twitter, so I loved it, and I still do love it. As I say, it was a little bit accidental and unexpected because I literally set up my Twitter account to start. Yeah, that was the first time that I ever had anything to do with Twitter. So I had no idea that this whole world of Grizz Twitter existed. So initially, I thought, I'd connect with maybe some other New Zealanders that were keen to follow. So pretty quickly, I got to kind of experience this whole world of Grizz Twitter. And actually, at that time, there was still this whole we traded away Jonas Valanciunas, who was
Mm-hmm.
kind of a 15 and 10 guy, and they got Stephen Adams. So there was there's definitely this whole group of Grizz Twitter that still resented the fact that they traded away a scorer in Jonas and got a role player in Stephen Adams.
Mm-hmm.
So that quickly became part of the motivation, was to kind of go, look, maybe if I can help convey the impact that Stephen Adams has as a low usage role player.
Yeah.
Actually, that was sort of part of that starting point. But like any franchise in the NBA, it's all about the core. So Grizz Twitter, actually, long term, the franchise is built around Jar, Des, Jaren,
Sure.
and I get that. But it often meant that actually no one really cared about Stephen Adams in those first 6 months. He was a bit of an afterthought. Every graphic that came out, was about the young core, and it kind of took me a while to realize that that's actually perfectly normal and understandable, and not to get offended by that, but to just you just work with that. And over time, my approach was always, look, if you're kind of credible with the stuff that you're putting out there, you'll always have more influence than you will if you kind of get offended and become just a random homer that no one respects. So look, and then over time, probably after just 6 months, you start to connect with lots of different people that are also sharing information about the team, sharing stats, interviewing players. One really cool story, actually, I don't think I've ever sort of put on the account or anything, but Parker Fleming. Do you know Parker?
I did it on my first show. It was my first guest, Parker
There you
Fleming.
go.
Yeah.
See, you know Parker well. Right. So just as an example of how awesome Grizz Twitter is, so I'm sat in New Zealand, and I don't know if you remember, but they do these gimmicky player nights where there's a bit of tat that is themed around a player. And there was one evening where it was Stephen Adams' Hawaiian shirt night. And so the first, whatever it was, 1,000 people in the door got this blue Grizzlies Hawaiian shirt that had Stephen Adams' face in it. And it was obviously pretty cool, and Grizz Twitter was loving it. But in New Zealand, you obviously can't get it, and I've never been to a game or anything. And then I get this message in my DMs from Parker, and he's like, "Hey man, I've got a spare shirt here. It's an extra large, whatever it is. Do you want it?" And I was like, "Yeah, man, that'd be awesome. Like the only guy in New Zealand to get one of these shirts." And so he packaged it up, sent it over. I was like, "Oh, let me know how much it is." He's like, "Nah, man, it's cool. We'll cover it all." So it just arrived on my doorstep. So to this day, I've got a bit of Grizz memorabilia from that occasion. So, just an example of how cool all the people are, and how welcoming they were of me as a Kiwi.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. That's a great story. Yeah, I do feel the same as Portuguese. I truly do the same about the Greece Twitter. You were talking about when Steven Adams came to Memphis, um, replacing Jonas, and like all the attention being on Jad Hassinger. With time, that changed, at least at a certain extent. From what I saw, to a lot of extent. How do you see um, Adams' impact on this Greece team?
Yeah, well, I think it actually didn't take long, to be fair to Grizz Twitter,
Hmm.
and there are a lot of people putting this out there that that usage difference between Jonas and Steven Adams was huge. And I think it did directly correlate to Desmond Bain's leap from year 2 to year 3. Um,
Hmm.
if you go back and look at it, Jonas was a scorer, but he was also taking a hang of a lot of those shots that were redistributed to Desmond Bain when Stephen Adams arrived. And there's a number of points I've done over time that actually show that correlation of usage reallocation. Because Stephen Adams in his first year was only at about 13-14% usage versus Jonas Valanciunas closer to 20%. And then a 7% uplift in usage for Desmond Bain in that first year with Stephen Adams. And it's not just the shot taking and the shot reallocation. It was in that same year, Desmond Bain went from 60 something in the league in terms of handoff scoring to top 5 in the league in handoff scoring, and that was just that direct result of the chemistry that the two of them had, the shots that were created off the space from handoffs, and just that making ability that Stephen Adams had that Jonas, it wasn't his strength, right? He was a lot more back to the basket. Yep, he could stretch the floor a little bit with his shooting, but he wasn't a past first center, and that was the key difference. And then Desmond Bain, obviously they had a great chemistry. I think the stat is that Des shot 56% over their whole, the 118 games that Stephen Adams played. Every game that he played with Desmond Bain, every 3-point shot that Desmond Bain took, averaged out at 56%. 3-point percentage over their time together, which is pretty crazy. So that's just Des, right? And obviously there were similar dynamics with Ja Morant, where actually Ja Morant had higher scoring stats and rebounding rates and rim field goal percentage when he was not on the court with Jonas Valanciunas. So actually Jonas was suppressing his capabilities in some areas, versus the exact opposite when he played with Stephen Adams. His on-off splits were off the charts with Stephen Adams versus without, and that obviously came through, the screening and the playmaking from the high hub in terms of backdoor passes and cuts. So it's it has played out for the core, where I think to the point people could really clearly see that he was a core amplifier rather than just seen as a come and go role player. It was very much the core plus what Stephen Adams brought to the table in that starting unit. And Jaren, obviously, we now know how important it is that Jaren is paired with a rebounding big, but also on the defensive end, someone that can take care of the bigger bodies, your Jokic, your Giannis's, whoever it is, those big bodies that need a 7-footer on them. So that he can continue to roam and rim protect, which is when he's at his best defensively.
Yeah. How did you feel when you heard the news that he was leaving?
Yeah, obviously it was a shock in that it wasn't widely speculated that it was even likely. Obviously he was dealing with his injury. There had been some history to how that injury.
Let me ask you before you go answer this question. Let me ask you, how did you see that this whole injury thing? Because in the beginning it was just supposed to be out like for 1 month or so, I believe. Then he was to miss the playoffs, then to come back beginning of the season, and like 2 days before the season started was out for all the injury. How did you see this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any more information than anyone else. Like I was just reading it as it played out, and it's pretty clear that it did break down a little bit between Stephen Adams and the team. And it's pretty clear as well that they didn't get perfect information from the start about the injury, that there was, I'm reluctant to call it a misdiagnosis, but at least a ambiguous diagnosis. Whether it was the team pushing for surgery or Stephen Adams pushing for surgery, or who it was that made the call that said, actually, we're not going to, let's get past that vague, ambiguous diagnosis. When they actually knew what it was, there was a decision made to not do surgery, to work that off season and try and come back, which, by all accounts, it sounds like a lot of people do well when they don't have the surgical intervention and when they come back. And Stephen Adams, he works hard, right? He's gonna he would have been absolutely busting his ass in that off season to do everything he could to make that injury come right.
Mhm.
But it just didn't hold up to the preseason. I think he only played 2 games in that preseason. It was
Yeah,
obvious. It's pretty heavily bandaged the whole way through. You couldn't notice any issues with how he played. He was still pretty impressive in the preseason hitouts that he had. But it just didn't have the stability. So look, something definitely went down. Um, I think it was pretty surprising that Steven Adams had no idea that he was going to be traded. Apparently, he wasn't told beforehand. He just got the phone call to say you've been traded, which is pretty stink. Um,
really? I didn't know
yeah,
that.
yeah. I mean, I think especially when he's been a starter his whole career, and
Hmm.
then he's intentionally traded to the Rockets, who have a young starting center in Şengün. So it's actually, it's actually a trade that makes him a bench player in the NBA. And I think he probably deserved a little bit of a conversation that says, "Hey, look, this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it." Not to give him the option of whether he takes it or not, but they got 2 second-round picks and Victor Oladipo as a salary dump for that trade.
Yeah,
And I'm pretty sure there were plenty of suitors out there, if they were shopping him round, that could have still let him be a starter level player. And I know there's no charity in the NBA; it's a business, right?
yeah,
But I think even Steven Adams would have been surprised at how that played out.
yeah. And it's still, you can always come clear on my point of view, of course.
Mm.
And you were so you were. I asked you, then I interrupt you. How did you felt when you knew that he was leaving? I was really surprised. I didn't see that coming.
Yeah, look, I think at that time, um, it felt like obviously the season was a write-off. We had injuries all over the place, so it was never about that season. It was about everybody, and myself included, having this expectation that actually Steven Adams was the missing piece that would take us back to what we experienced in that half season of 22-23, of that full season of 21-22, where he was the perfect complementary piece, where they go from being a better than average team to actually a contending team.
Hmm.
So the thing I was most surprised about was actually the gamble that the franchise took by not backing him and trying to retain him and bringing him back and seeing how it goes. Um, but on the other hand, I do kind of get it, right? He's 30. He has a serious knee injury. It wasn't certain what the outcome of the surgery would be, and they needed certainty. So, you know, it's like I say, it's a business. I'm not against front office because of it. I just think everybody was surprised, like I was.
Yeah, and yeah, I was too. I really was. I was not counting on that. It really surprised me a lot. Um, so last season you were half of the season with the Grizzlies and half of the season with the Rockets. How did you see the last season from on both of these teams? Like for Grizzlies, it was like really bad, but you wanna elaborate on that?
Yeah, look, I think it was absolutely a flush it season. But out of that has come Gigi Jackson and Vince William Jr.
Hmm.
as rotation pieces, which is we wouldn't have known that if that season hadn't played out like it is. So to get two rotation guys out of a write-off season, everyone can see the upside to that. But you know, I did still have some worries about how that first half of the season played out, though. Even those 9 games with Ja Morant. Um, yeah, I distinctly remember Taylor Jenkins at the end of the off season previously, at the start of the off season previously. He was saying, the focus needs to be on half court efficiency, half court offense. He's going to do all this work on it. That was his one work on.
Hmm.
And at no point in that first half of the season, when even when Ja Morant was out for those 25 games and the team was terrible, Even when Jar was back, they won more games, but actually the offense was still really inefficient. Um, so, there were still some red flags in that season, even though it was a write-off. Forget the second half of the season. Um, so it's interesting to see now that the whole coaching staff is cleared out except for Taylor Jenkins, and the focus on the head coach coming in with Lasalo is
From
that whole
Paris.
offensive. Yeah, from Paris is the whole. Taylor Jenkins has surrounded himself with people that can help him do what he couldn't do, which is try and fix the offense.
Okay, and then for the Rockets were almost going into the play-in. I was, in fact, well, rooting for them to get in the play-in. Well, I was more like rooting for the Warriors not to get into play-in, but it was not the same. How did
I
you
think
see
I
that?
think that was all neutrals across NBA were hoping that that the Warriors weren't going to make it, but it didn't work out.
Hmm. And but how did you see the last part of the season with the Rockets?
Yeah, that was fun. I mean, just to be clear, I was still following the Grizzlies, and
Hmm.
I mean, I didn't watch every game, but I probably watched still 80% of the games. Um, but it was just that I started, posting on my account about the Rockets. So I really enjoyed getting to know the team. They've got an amazing young core, which is really
Hmm.
exciting, and just seeing that dynamic. Obviously, it's all built around Alperen Şengün and Jalen Green, and there's 5 or 6 others in the young core there. So, I, I mean, I'd watched the Rockets off and on, but I hadn't quite appreciated how much talent they've got there. And then obviously last season they surrounded it with Fred VanVleet, with Dylan Brooks,
Brooks.
which were great, vet additions for the season. So, they were pretty tough in that. They went on that heater in the last sort of month of the season where they were pretty much unbeatable against, middle of the road opposition, to be fair. But
Hmm.
I think everyone could see the flashes of what the next, 1, 2, 3 seasons are going to be and what that trajectory is going to be like. So it was pretty exciting to see that. But also just to be watching it from actually, how is Steven Adams going to fit in here? What's that going to look like? And just trying to get a feel for the style of play as well.
Good. 2 questions. How how is Dylan Brooks working working out on the Rockets? His role.
Yeah, look, it's interesting. Like he started out the season shooting 40-something% from
Hmm.
three,
Yeah,
which was,
I saw that.
he carried on from the amazing World Cup he had with Canada.
Canada. Hmm.
Yeah. So I remember as with my Grizz hat on, going, man, why did we trade that guy away? But that was kind of the sentiment. But by the end of the season, I think the feeling was more, um, he's still a high usage guy that shouldn't be a high usage guy. He's
Hmm.
still a great defender and the guy that you want to be able to, help cement perimeter D for a team. But just that sense that actually this is a guy that's taking away minutes from the young core as well. So obviously he's starting, he's getting 80 mil. And I think the tide is sort of starting to turn, at least based on Rocket's Twitter, that actually when we talk about which of these young bench guys are going to get more opportunity next year, the first name that people talk about getting less minutes from the starters is Dylan Brooks. So they appreciate what he brings to winning. They appreciate, his defensive intensity and everything that he brings. But actually, what's more important? Is it minutes for our young core and developing that, or is it seeing Dylan Brooks try and get to the point where he's on a heater every game? You know, they're actually quite happy for him to take a back seat. So, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Because, in Doku, he wants to win, and
Yeah,
Dylan's a winner.
yeah,
He's a winner. So there is a tension there between development of the core and win now. And I think you'll see that with Steven Adams minutes as well. There'll be times when Udoka plays Steven Adams more than what the fan base wants, right? Because he impacts the game. And, there might even be times when he plays two bigs when he plays Şengün and Stephen Adams at the same time, just to see what happens. And if it goes well, it might happen more. That wouldn't be too crazy.
Yeah, I was going to ask you how do you see Steven Adams fitting in on this Rockets roster on this team? What
Yeah, I mean,
role do you
obviously,
see him taking?
yeah, I mean, obviously he'll come off the bench, but that bench unit is incredible. You know, there's not a
Hmm.
lot of difference between, um, you know, the depth of or the ability of the starting five and the bench. You know, guys like Cam Whitmore and Armin Thompson and Tari Eason's come back from injury, Reed
Hmm.
Shepherd. You know, so they're the sorts of guys that he's going to be spending time with minutes wise. But you know, they're obviously going to find ways to pair him with Jalen Green as well and see what he can do off the space he creates from screens. Um, they're gonna be interested in the defensive matchups with Tari Eason, with Jabari Smith Jr. What does that look like with Stephen Adams able to hold down the bigger defenders? Oh, sorry, hold down
Hmm.
the bigger offensive players from the opposition. You know, freeing those guys up to roam more. Yeah, I mean, he's a guard enhancer, right? Stephen Adams, his whole reason for being out on the court is to work with the guards to understand their game and to get them good looks. You know,
Yeah.
so guys like Reed Shepherd, you know, he's the perfect big to pair with a team stacked full of young guard talent. Um, and so that's going to be his attitude. It's just going to be, I'm just going to do everything I can. I'm going to get extra positions. I'm going to find my guys. I'm going to create space for them. And he'll do it in an incredibly selfless way. And that will be very contrasted to Alperen Şengün, right? He's a great playmaker as well as a scorer, but he's
Hmm.
the first option. You know, he's the first option. Um, so I think we'll see two very contrasting styles in the minutes that they're sharing. So I think Steve-O will start out playing 20 minutes a game.
Hmm.
But if he has the impact that I think he might, I wouldn't be surprised if they find ways for him to be playing 25 minutes. And you know, there will be stretches where Şengün is injured, or you know, he'll probably only play 70 games at best. And so there'll be opportunities to see what the Rockets look like with Stephen Adams starting, with Stephen Adams playing 30 minutes a game, no doubt.
Hmm. You mentioned Reed Shepherd. How did you see the draft from the Rockets?
Yeah, look, I think they were very fortunate because two things happened at the same time. The best player available, not just through their assessment, but you know, a lot of the big boards had Reed Shepherd as a, you know, 2, 3, 4, you know, 5 prospect,
Hmm.
and but also in terms of fit with the team, those two things coincided, right? They didn't have a knockdown shooter in the squad. Um, they needed that. And you know, even though he's 6'1", he's a good athlete. He's got a 40-something inch vertical. He's super smart, high IQ, got a bit of playmaking ability. So, you know, he's a really strong complementary piece to that young core. You know, they've got a lot of length already. So the fact that he's a bit smaller didn't matter as much. It's not like they were trying to
Hmm.
hide another, you know, 6', 6'1", 6'2" guard. Actually, the rest of their young core is kind of 6'4" plus. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, those two things really came together where actually nobody was really gutted. Uh, Often there's a lot of contrasting views on Rocket's Twitter about all sorts of stuff, but actually there was quite a bit of consensus around Reed Shepherd.
Hmm. Also, on the draft, you tweeted something about ED. How did you see the Grizzlies taking ED at the ninth pick?
Yeah, I really liked it. I would have liked Klingon as well,
Hmm.
mostly because of his playmaking upside, and obviously defensive upside. But you know, to stay at 9 and take Edie was, you know, there wasn't much in it between those two decisions in my mind. Um, and I think what they've got in Edie, and I don't know if you saw the Summer League game today, but what they've got in him is somebody that will adapt to a high impact, low usage role player in the league. And that's the bit that was more important to me rather than is he going to be able to score, 15, 20 a game like he did in
Uh-huh.
college. Clearly, that's not what the Grizzlies need him to do, right? There'll be times when they use him for his offensive finishing and for the mismatches that he'll create, being 300 pounds, 7'5".
Mm-hmm.
But actually, they they need him to impact the offense in a low usage way, and that's what he showed at Summer League today. That he can do exactly that. He's a beast on the boards. He sets hard screens. He's going to do all the things that Steven Adams did in that same role. It'll take him a while to be as impactful with that, I think. But he's way ahead of where Steven Adams was at the same age. So he's a good pick. Defensively, obviously, there's a few question marks about how that translates in terms of perimeter D. But Memphis has had the last 4 seasons between Jonas Valanciunas and Steven Adams of drop coverage centers holding
Mm-hmm.
down a defense that's really good, with Jaren, making up for all of those differences. They're a fantastic paint protecting team, and Eddie's going to support that. He's going to enhance that. And any shortcomings that he does have on the perimeter switch ups, getting hunted in the pick and roll, that's all stuff that the Grizzlies have survived before. So I'm not as worried about that. For me, it's more, how is he going to contribute to the offensive efficiency leap that the Grizzlies are going to have to make to become
Mm-hmm.
contenders?
Yeah. What's like common things and the different things that you see um, between Sakiri and Steven Adams?
I think the similarities are um, the physicality and how they play. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, the screening and the handoff space creation. Um, Steven Adams was a lot more of a pass making playmaker. So,
Mm-hmm.
he can really thread the needle. He can find backdoor cutters. You're not going to see that straight away from Edie. It's not to say it won't develop later, but he can still operate in that high hub because he's physical, and he'll set that first pick and then settle into that high hub and maybe the short roll and just hit guys with bodies on the handoff, and you'll have Des coming off that with all the space that Steve-O created. So I think he'll do it in different ways, um, but he's a bigger body than Steven Adams. And what's going to be interesting is he's obviously also got the ability for some 2-man game with Ja Morant. Is he going to be a lob target, or is he going to do what Steve-O did? Because Steven Adams could have been a lob target, right? It's not like he's
Yeah.
unathletic, and we
No.
saw it at times. But actually, what he did was he prioritized his
Screens.
timing on the pick and roll to
Mm-hmm.
get to crash the offensive rebound. So when Ja Morant missed a shot at the rim, Steven Adams got the rebound on 42% of the time.
42?
42% of the time.
Jesus. Okay.
So he didn't care about, he was never thinking, I'm a scoring option here. He was thinking, right, I've pick and roll with Ja. Once I've set that pick, I'm reading what Ja does, and I'm timing my attack of the rim entirely based on what Ja is doing and when the ball is going to be at the rim, which is
Mm-hmm.
completely different timing to being ready to receive a lob. So I think, Edie and Morant will work that out. There'll be times when it is about the lob and the pick and roll where Edie's the threat. And there'll be other times when actually he can tell that Jar's just taking the play, and he does what he can. So I don't think Edie is going to be an offensive rebounding beast.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's going to, maybe 30% of his rebounds will be offensive rebounds, whereas Steven Adams, it's more like 40 to 50% of his rebounds are offensive rebounds.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, that's kind of the main similarities and differences. But he's his own player, right? He's going to develop in a way that that works for the team. He'll have his own defensive pairing with Jaren, that'll look quite different because he is more of a rim protecting presence. His standing reach is massive compared to Steven Adams. So they'll be able to use him in ways that they couldn't use Steven Adams defensively, which is why I think they're going to comfortably be a top 5 defensive team. Because they're going to have they're going to have Marcus Smart, they're going to have Vince Williams Jr. as perimeter defensive anchors, which they haven't had
Hmm.
in previous years, and they're going to have the twin tower front court as well. So yeah, I'm thinking top 5 defense for sure.
Okay. Now, I want to ask you too. It was a detour. This is a detour because I should have asked you before. How are things going on Rocket's Twitter for you now?
It's awesome, man. It's it's obviously a shock at the start to realize that you have to kind of unplug from one fan base and plug into another one and not knowing what
Uh-huh.
you're plugging into. But it's a bigger market, right? So more
Uh-huh.
people care about it.
Mhm.
and that dynamic I was talking about, which was the young core versus the vets. That's very much a thing in Rockets as well, right? That it's their future is about this. They went through the pain of tanking to get this young core, and so they are just completely invested in what is best for the young core. And so Steven Adams comes along, and that's all they're really interested in is what's that going to mean for the next 1, 2, 3 years of this rebuild. But it's pretty tough to not like Steven Adams, to not like what he brings. He's a completely selfless player. So
Mhm.
people have been interested in kind of my takes on things. There's an openness to kind of understanding how he might work with the group. But the other interesting thing is, there's
But-
two factions within Rocket's Twitter, right? There's those that think
Mhm.
that Şengün is the future of the franchise, and those that think that Jalen Green is the future of the franchise. And these
Oh.
are not even so much Rockets fans, but they are player stans that
Uh-huh.
are with the Rockets because of that, and so I think some of them see Steven Adams as a bit of a threat to
Şengün?
Şengün's. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm just finding my feet, playing it low key, and
Uh-huh.
just kind of laying low until the season starts and Steven Adams is back healthy, and then I'll ramp up the activity.
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned the season starting. What do you see like the goals for both teams on next season? You can start by Grizzlies or by Rockets as you wish.
Yeah, well, I think the Rockets um, are actually really realistic. The fan base is really realistic about what's ahead for them. They had a 41 and 41 season last year. Just missed out
Mm-hmm.
on the play-in. And there's two things that I think the fan base acknowledge. One is they're going to definitely be a better team next year. But they're also acknowledging that the whole of the West is a better conference next year.
Yeah.
So those two things should mean that actually the Rockets have gotten, relative to other teams, have gotten better. So there's an expectation that there is a winning record, maybe more like 48, 50 wins.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and whether it's through the play-in, probably through the play-in, I think there's a sense that they'll be disappointed if they get bumped and are out in the play-in and they don't progress to the playoffs. But then I think if the Rockets make the playoffs and they progress beyond and they don't progress beyond the first round, that would be understandable. It's likely that
Mm-hmm.
they're probably the 8th seed or the 7th seed, and that will likely you'll be facing two of those incredibly good teams, whether that is OKC Thunder or maybe it's the
Dwarves,
Nuggets,
Nuggets.
Mavs, any of those guys. That's going to be a tough ask in what is really the second year of not being a tanking team, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I think there's some, that's probably where the season projection is looking at the moment. I think there's some potential upside there. I wouldn't be surprised if they're contending for an outright playoff spot and surprise a few people.
Yeah. Okay.
But
Mm-hmm.
that's obviously relies on healthy squad.
Yeah. We both know that
Yeah,
from last season. Yeah.
yeah.
Um.
And for the
And
Grizzlies,
yeah, for the Grizzlies.
yeah, it's tough, isn't it? Because even though there's no new pieces um, in terms of the core squad,
Hmm. Hmm.
you've got kind of your best 13 players coming back if they re-sign, if they get Luke Kennard back,
Hmm.
plus the two rookies. So there's no new, significant pieces. But Edie is going to impact the game. So it's filled a big chunk of that gap that Steve-O left. Um, I guess the challenge is, that group of teams that we mentioned just a minute ago, right? Like, how do the Grizzlies stack up against the Thunder, the Wolves, the Nuggets, the Mavs? Um, I'm really confident that they're right at the top of that next pack that we talk about, but are they part of that top pack? I think
Hmm.
if we're optimistic and if we're hopeful and if we're healthy, there's no reason why. If you think the Nuggets, the year we had 56 wins, they had what, 60 wins?
Yes, yeah, something
Yeah,
like
so
that.
they were
Yeah.
so they were one seed, we were two seed. Our squad is probably, we've maintained and the Grizzlies, there's not really much difference between those two squads, between that 22-23 year and the 24-25 year, as they will be. You could almost
Hmm.
argue that the Nuggets have gotten weaker, losing KCP
Hmm.
and other key pieces, and don't have the same bench depth that the Grizzlies, I think, now have. So I know they're champions. I know that, but on paper, actually, there's no reason why the Grizzlies couldn't compete over 82 games and come out with a similar record to the Nuggets. I just, people will think I'm a homer and people will think that I'm a bit crazy, but I can imagine a world where that happens.
Yeah, yeah, me too. Me too. And, okay, I got two more questions for you. One, um, how is it to go from a team where coach is Taylor Jenkins to a team where coach is Udoka? What are the differences between those two coaches?
Hmm.
I'm not asking which one you like the most. That's because I think they're pretty different. But um, what do you see?
I think there's similarities is that they're both very defensive-minded coaches.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so both the Rockets and the Grizzlies will be top 10 defensively next year.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think you can see in the way that they coach and the priorities that they have, the way that they play D, um, the moves that they make. It's no surprise that the two vets that they've brought in the last couple of years are Stephen Adams and Dylan Brooks, because they were so important to the defensive makeup of the Grizzlies.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that's probably where the comparisons start and end, right? I don't know enough about Udoka and his play style. Um, he's very much we're going to go out there and we're going to shoot 43s, and he's always been like that, right? Back to his
Mm-hmm.
Celtics days. So he's very much stretch the floor, five out when we can. He told Şengün, go and shoot threes over the off season. Come back so that we can have you more perimeter orientated. Um, and so, that he's worked it out on the offensive end, and he's trying to get this young Rockets squad up to the point where they can play comfortably in that system.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he's shown that works with a unit that's a bit older, a bit more mature with the Celtics. Whereas Taylor Jenkins wants to be able to do that, but he's never coached a team that's been effective at doing it, right? He's never had a squad with the shooters or something about his execution in doing that. He's talked a big game about the Grizzlies shooting threes. And I think last year, even though we wrote that season off, there were just some
Mm-hmm.
games there where we shot 53s, because
Yeah.
that's the philosophy and the ethos that Jenkins wants to coach, but just the execution and the abilities and the squad makeup isn't there. So it'll be interesting, actually, another full year on how those two coaching styles compare and contrast. But yeah, as I say, it was no surprise to me that Jenkins completely swept house and brought in new offensively minded assistant coaches, particularly the head coach from Paris.
Yeah. Okay. Now I want to ask you also. Um, New Zealand is more correct me if I am wrong. More a rugby country, football maybe.
Yeah, rugby, huge. Yep.
Right. How much of a figure Steve is on New Zealand?
Yeah, like I said at the start, the media coverage is minimal of NBA in general.
Mm-hmm.
We have a local competition, so the NBL. We have a local team here, the Breakers, that play in the NBL. That gets good coverage. We get good crowds that go to that game. So there is some coverage of it, but actually because we don't have that reporter depth. We don't have people that know the NBA. The quality of the reporting is just copy and paste from whatever articles come out of the US. And because there isn't a lot of coverage of Steven Adams out of the US, that means that the coverage here in New Zealand is pretty basic. So, look, amongst the young people in New Zealand, and I say young people, whatever, they under 23-year-olds. Actually, there's a lot of people that watch a hang of a lot of NBA, and it's part of the culture in New Zealand.
Mm-hmm.
It's got a
Mm-hmm.
massive following as a sport. I think in those younger age groups, at high school, basketball is overtaking rugby in terms of participation growth. But yeah, it's still pretty tough to cover it. But Steven Adams himself, he's one of the wealthiest athletes in New Zealand. He's a super low key, humble guy. He's everything that New Zealanders love. So he's kind of seen as just a good dude that's down to earth. That when he comes back to New Zealand, he just kind of hangs out. He doesn't get bothered by people, but
Mm-hmm.
he's happy to just yarn with everyone. So yeah, I mean, he gets coverage, but it's been great. I've got a few reporters that follow my account, so I've seen that a lot of the stuff that I will pick up on and amplify on Twitter gets picked up and ends up in a newspaper here or whatever it is. So that's another nice wee thing about what I do.
Yeah, for sure. Uh, Look, man, I want to thank you so much for being here. It was an honor to have you here. Hopefully you can come back some other time next season so we can talk more if you're willing to.
Well, thanks, man. Look, that's one of the great things about Grizz Twitter is that it's not just about Memphis, people in Memphis supporting the local team. It's got such a global coverage, and you helping bring that community together and taking the time to speak with people like me who represent the wider interests and the people that care about the team. So thanks for doing all you do to bring it together, man.
No, thank you. It's really my honor to have you here. And you know that, but you missed on Chris Twitter. Stephen is missed on the team, but you also missed on Chris Twitter for sure, for sure. I want to thank you
Yeah,
once again. No, go on, please.
no, thank you. No, yeah, I mean, next season once the season starts, I'll get back into. Yeah, I'll still be following both teams, right? I'll be watching both games. I'll be posting
Hmm.
about both teams, whether that's all on my main account or whether I've got the other one as well. But I'll definitely be covering both because my dream result is for both the Grizzlies and the Rockets to make the playoffs. But what I don't want is for them to be playing each other.
Yeah,
That
me too.
is going to be kind of tough to follow.
I can, yeah, yeah. I understand that for sure, for sure. What's the other account you were mentioning?
Grizz Stats at
Chris.
Grizz Stats.
Uh, Sorry,
Yeah, it's the handle is at Grizz Stats.
at Chris said. Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
so that's just pure Grizzlies. I'm not really using it over the off season, but once the season starts, that's what I'll put most of my Grizzlies content on.
Okay. I'm gonna check it out. Once again, thank you so much. It was really an honor to have you here. It's like what, almost midnight there?
Uh, 10 p.m.
10 p.m. Okay, it's 11 a.m. here. It's a funny word.
There you go. No, thanks for
Okay,
making it work.
sorry.
I said thanks for having me on, man.
No. It was my pleasure. And so everybody, it was episode 13 of Grizzlies Worldwide. We had Steven Adams stats here. We do miss him on Grizz Twitter. And when the season starts, he surely will be coming back. You all go check his profile on Twitter. You already do. And also the Grizz stats profile too. Okay. So thank you, everybody. And thank you again, Steven Adams stats, for being here. It was an honor.
See you later.